Welcome to Building Innovation, the podcast, convening experts to discuss issues and solutions.
Hey everyone, welcome to Building Innovation, the podcast, where each month we convene subject matter experts to support advances in building science and technology. I'm your host, Johnny Fortune, and I am super excited today to be joined by Dr. Ralph Kreider, longtime friend, longtime supporter of NBIMS, very active person in the industry, well known by many of you, but it is just an absolute pleasure and a joy to have you here with us today, Ralph. Welcome.
Thank you, Johnny. Thank you.
So we've been talking about doing this a while, and very excited that we're finally able to get this episode with you. I always like to start out with letting the audience know a little bit about you. Now, again, you're pretty renowned in the industry. A lot of people do know you because of a lot of your works and your writings and your many contributions. But tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do.
Well, I appreciate it, Johnny. So I haven't been around quite as long as some, but I feel like I've been trying to contribute to the industry for a while. So like ever since grad school, been working on National BIM Standard and things like that, and just trying to make our industry a little bit better. So happy to, my background is Penn State architectural engineering, focused on construction management there, really got into the BIM space when it was, I wouldn't call it like the very earliest of the BIM space, but it was still pretty early, still going out there, helped out with like the Army Corps of Engineers and things like that. Probably that's where we might have met, Johnny.
Yeah. So you mentioned, your educational background, and I don't know if you worked primarily in construction or construction firms. Is that right?
Yeah. So my background in that case, all construction firms. So construction management company, first company there, worked for a company, big projects like Architect of the Capitol, Smithsonian, National Institutes of Health, your large government institutions there, a lot of those agency type work. And then for 4 years, worked for a multifamily, $700 million multifamily residential contractor here in Maryland. In those roles, I was pretty much primarily in a technology role, even from early on. Helped with the for Architect of the Capitol, we helped write their BIM requirements and really evaluate what they're doing for Cannon House office building. And basically one of the first like BIM to FM efforts that they had. And then like Smithsonian, we were doing some commissioning and just capturing BIM data during that process.
Yeah, that's an impressive resume because it's not only technology adoption in BIM, but and many people and many like small firms or medium-sized firms are doing it on a smaller scale. This is a pretty large scale you're talking about. This is some mega. Well, I call them mega projects, maybe. But
I mean, that was multiple billion, or not $1 billion project. So it was a large implementation of BIM. Some successes and failures there. Always some lessons learned on that project. Some nightmares that will maybe no. I don't go to sleep thinking about it very often anymore.
Yeah.
Maybe back in the day there's some sleepless nights, but not anymore. And then like with my last company, the multifamily GC though I worked with is really focused on transforming their organization from analog to digital. It's like what I would say we moved from a lot of paper-based processes, put a lot of automation in place, fully adopted Procore there, fully adopted a new CRM, fully adopted a new estimating process, new bidding platform, like the piling on a new cybersecurity. So we did a lot of digital transformation there, going from basic processes to hopefully they're still benefiting from those changes that we had over the years.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons I appreciate your perspective. It's not just, when you say BIM, it's not just about, a model. It's a lot about information requirements and information management, and it's as I've heard you talk often, it's really about tying the technology to these overarching initiatives and goals of an organization or a project.
Yeah. Obviously, people, process, and technology, right? So you can't go on without incorporating how are people going to do this? Like, Is it a need for the organization? Is it a need for the people in the organization? What's the process? So I always find it difficult where people were like, let's just add BIM to the process, right? Let's just put it on as a new thing that we're going to do. Guys, you do your day job, and then at night go model. If you want to do some other kind of modeling, that's up to you. But like, don't do BIM modeling at night, please. Let's stop that in our industry.
Yeah.
And let's so what can we take away? What can we start taking away from the process? What can we simplify the process? What can we start replacing? I mean, that's one of the challenges of BIM. It's never been part of the mainstream process in a lot of organizations. So they're not taking away. They're still going back to the paper plans. They're still going back to the legacy way of doing things as far as the technology goes.
So, Ralph, do you think that is like it's one of the reasons that there's been some difficulties in adoption of BIM is because it's not properly been tied into existing processes and improving them?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say for sure. So I don't think in a lot of organizations it's just another requirement that we have to do BIM or we have to, and it's not integral to me actually delivering the project. And I used to say this a lot. If you talk to an architect, I'm building a Revit model to produce drawings, right? Or if you talk to a contractor, I'm using clash detection to produce shop drawings basically and free up my clashes. Before that was BIM. That was a BIM world for years, and it's finally expanding beyond that. But in a lot of cases, it's slowed down. It was not. It's the organizations that think it's an executive or a leadership problem that have really truly transformed their operations around it. And how can we get the integrations, the ties between the organizations is really what's, I think, stopping us from the maximum effectiveness of today. Like, can we simplify those data exchanges, that information exchange from one organization to another so that there's a lot, just how can we make it simpler?
Yeah. I appreciate that perspective as well. Oftentimes you take complex topics and distill them down to an easier way and a simpler way to communicate it. And BIM has been a technical and complex topic for a lot of people on the adoption side, and I really appreciate your perspective of saying that this is the business that we do, this is the processes that we have. How can we improve them?
Yeah, I would always go back to like an architect's job is to communicate design intent, right? Design team, they're communicating design intent. What is the simplest way to get that information to your contractor so that they can build the building? In the end, we're building a product, right? So we're building something physical. So everything else, like the set of plans is waste. Like if you go back, the project schedule is waste. Like every part of our process, if we're not putting physical work in place, it is waste. So how can we simplify that across the board as much as we can?
Yeah. So you mentioned your involvement with NBIMS and the National BIM Standard way back, even when you were finishing up your doctorate. So yeah, let's talk about some of the things you've done over the years with NBIMS. And let me say, on behalf of NBIMS, thank you very much. It's volunteers and contributors like you that make it happen. But which version of NBIMS did you first get involved in? Do you recall?
I think it was V2. Yeah, I think if I'm remembering correctly, and it's been like 2009 is really when I started getting involved with a lot of this stuff. So 15 years. Happy 15th anniversary, Johnny.
Yeah.
And we've been working on advancing it ever since then. So like our first experience was with the BIM Project Execution Planning Guide, right? So that BIM Project Execution Planning Guide was adopted by the Army Corps of Engineers, adopted by a lot of different organizations. Like I remember when I was working on the website, might have been it starting as an undergrad in 2008, 2007 timeframe that we were working on really starting publishing this work. And working on that website, and we got hundreds of thousands of downloads. Like I think second year it was out, when we started actually tracking downloads, we got 50,000. And I'm like, oh, we have something here. So that was one of the first pieces of work, 4-step process, make it simple, understand your goals, get your data right, get your process right, and then what is your infrastructure to actually support your process there. And then that took off. We kind of tangentially, as part of the process, as part of the BIM goals, we needed to identify BIM uses. So that's really where our first introduction of BIM uses. And I don't want to let any secrets out of the bag here, but it was undergrads and grad students that were first identifying these BIM uses and doing all the work, interviewing industry experts that are implementing and going through and documenting. And then we reiterated, got it peer reviewed, and then finally published that first version back in 2009, I believe, 2010 timeframe.
So you've continued to be heavily involved in the evolution of BIM uses through the years, right?
Yeah. Then I decided to write a dissertation, and like you doing, it's not always fun. So that's a lot of sleepless nights working on that. My dissertation actually focused on the uses of BIM. So how do people use? Why do people use building information modeling? What is the fundamental purpose? And I broke it into some basic characteristics. So I call them BIM use characteristics, and then BIM use purposes. So why are we using BIM? And what happened, I think, in a lot of the initial BIM use cases identified by our BIM project execution planning guide, bim.psu.edu, by the way, it's still actually up there, is they embedded a lot of the disciplines inside of them. They embedded a lot of design phases. They embedded a lot of maturity, let's call it model maturity or model level development inside of them. And that was a challenge because when you looked at and boil it down to the process and the purpose, why are we doing this? It was fundamentally the same reason, right? Like we had a design coordination, we had a 3D coordination, we had an MEP coordination. There was like 7, like when I was actually giving my defense, we walked through like 7 or 8, maybe even more. I did probably look over at 5,000 plus BIM uses in that effort. So not the time of your life, but you felt like it was doing important work. So it was informative. Anyway, so for one, what I would call the fundamental same purpose or same use of BIM, they're called like 7 or 8, 10, 15, 20 different names for the same thing, which creates a huge problem when you're communicating requirements, when you're communicating to one thing. And I'll say one thing, Johnny, to you, and you'll hear something completely different. So we're talking in a completely different language all the time. And the level of effort, and like when you're comparing one contractor to another, or if I'm just trying to put a budget to something and say, how much is this going to cost? It becomes impossible. So that was really what I tried to do through my dissertation. So we then created the uses of BIM, put together those characteristics, list of BIM uses. I think I had like 20 different BIM uses at the time, maybe 18, 19 BIM use purposes, I would call them. And then we actually put that in the BIM planning guide for facility owners, which was our next release as the Penn State Computer Integrated Construction Research Group. And we validated both of those, and they were adopted into NBIMS V3, I believe. Yeah. So they got there, and then we can talk about V4.
Yeah. Well, I do think you're maybe not the title of king of BIM uses, but I mean, you probably know more about BIM uses given the history than just about anybody I know. And
I don't know if that's a compliment or not, Johnny. I mean, so the whole 10,000 hours thing, if you spend 10,000 hours, you become an expert. Yeah, probably spent 10,000 hours on BIM uses through the years.
I'm sure, especially with the dissertation. I remember my mentor and chair of my committee, he gave me some good advice. He said, look, don't sweat the defense of your dissertation, because by the time you get to that point, you will know more about this topic than anybody in the room. And that's true for a dissertation, but you might know, I'm sure you know more about this topic than anybody else I know. There may be some other people around the world.
There's a lot of people out in the world doing great things and knowing how to implement these BIM uses, which is probably more important than knowing about the the subject of what a BIM use is and what a BIM use is not, and we can debate that for years, and we have debated it for years, Johnny.
Yep.
But hopefully, we came up with something that can be at least agreed upon as a stepping stone towards a common language, common communication process.
Well, intro V4, right? That's kind of one of the big pieces we wanted to do with version 4 of the National BIM Standard. And you were the lead for the BIM use work group, BIM use definition work group. Affectionately referred to as BUD, by the way. The acronym BUD is BIM use definitions. So, I just
called it BIM uses, like, but I'll be your bud, Johnny, if that's what you want. So that was a experience over a couple years. It maybe took us a little longer than we wanted to publish it, but it was a good group of people that we had working on it, right? So little bit of a different approach than we've done in the past. We took a step back. So like BIM NBIMS V4, and you know this better than I do, but set up like, let's create the standard. Let's get the information. Let's find the elements that we need to get people adopting BIM, get people using BIM, set up BIM requirements. So you have the 4 different aspects that we published in the National BIM Standard. With that, BIM uses was a big part of that. How do we use BIM? Why do we use BIM? What's the purpose of BIM in the first place? It's a core part of the BIM execution planning guide. It's a core part of previous versions, but it was just what some grad student did and balloted, and that became the National BIM Standard. And maybe another secret out of the bag there were inconsistencies from version to version, and there were inconsistencies from module to module in the BIM standard. So let's bring it all back. Let's put a set standard group together. That's what we worked for. So we got a group of probably anywhere between 15 and 20 industry experts from both the vertical and horizontal world. So that's one thing that, like NBIMS in the past, we didn't do a great job of. And I'll be frank and honest, we did a little bit of peer review in the BIM project execution planning guide with some horizontal people, but we were all vertical people at heart. This time we got horizontal work. We focused on that. We focused on not necessarily creating BIM uses just for horizontal, but we then started, what is the unifying standard? What is the unifying reason we're doing this? Why are we doing it? What's the purpose, rather than it just being horizontal? Like, I don't know, like, I'm not the expert in the horizontal BIM uses like you think I'm the expert in vertical, but let's make a unifying group of BIM uses. So we met as a committee, I don't know how many times, probably way too many times, and went through, started with our well, not 5,000, but probably several hundred, boiled several hundred BIM uses from different resources out there into, in the end, we got to 16, right? So these are the fundamental reasons why we're using BIM. They are not everything. We spent a good amount of time talking about whether it's an emerging BIM use or is it industry standard. Is it adopted? Is it has it become widely adopted and focused on those? So a lot of the I don't want to call them fringe BIM uses, but the ones that have a few example cases, we created a process where the people could add additional BIM uses or clarify and give a framework for people to have a way to communicate what their intent is with BIM. But we still focused on what are the 16 most widely adopted, widely implemented, easily, clearly able to be communicated BIM uses out there. And did a lot of, hey, does this qualify? Does this not qualify? What's the exact language? So we spent time working through the exact definition, reviewing the exact definition, and really focus on who does this apply to, how would we start actually setting this up as a requirement, communicating a common language.
Yeah, and over those couple of years, it was actually before I became a staff member at NIBS, and I was a volunteer for a long time, and I volunteered on this group, so I worked with you on that, and I saw firsthand the many BIM uses that were reviewed, analyzed, consolidated, the many discussions around them, the many intermittent and intermediate reviews. very, very step by step, very methodical to get to that list. And
Yeah, we had probably at some points 10 people debating a BIM use for one single BIM use for multiple sessions. So it's like, well, sometimes it felt a little circular, but we made it through and we got to what I think is probably the best, um, most easily adopted way to communicate your intent with BIM in our list of 16 BIM uses.
And I appreciate you bringing up the point about, which ones are widely adopted. I do remember that being a big topic of discussion. Like each time that a BIM use came up, there was that question of, okay, is this an aspirational, maybe a future type BIM use, but it's not really been put into place. And that's really exactly what you want out of a national standard. You don't want it to be, theoretical, or maybe you could do this, but you really want it to be, here's the most common pieces that the industry has naturally adopted and is naturally using, and you want to make that information available to others.
What's the 20% to get you 80% of the results, right? So we had lists that were 50, 100 uses long, and we look at them, and I ask around the table, who's doing this? Do you know anyone that's doing this? Whose organization? Like, one thing, and we talked a little bit earlier in the episode about adoption of BIM, right? And we have a lot of great cases and people doing great things in BIM, but it was one great project. It was one great individual. It was one great organization. I'm more interested, and I think the National BIM Standard should be more interested in who's adopted as an organization, who's adopted it across the board in an institution, right? So what are the basics? Like, let's raise the bar on our expectations for project delivery, and let's not always work to the lowest common denominator. I think it's great. There's people out there doing the aspirational things that you talked about. It's great that people are really pushing the envelope with technology right now and emerging technology and things that we're doing. But 99%, probably that's a little high. All the stats are made up, Johnny, by the way.
Of course.
But a large majority of projects are not doing innovative things. Your house is not likely going to be an innovative project.
Right.
We need to elevate the basic delivery of facilities. And that's like, when we're thinking about BIM uses and when we're thinking about a national BIM standard, that really should be our focus. Yes, we want to provide an outlet for people to be great and innovative in their project delivery, but we also want to elevate the bottom. We want to bring that bottom up and make project delivery simpler for the life.
Yeah, some people have asked in the past, like, what are the BIM uses? I typically describe them as, these are the building blocks of your BIM execution planning. They're the building blocks of your project BIM requirements and information exchanges. Without these building blocks, you really can't have these other pieces. These are basically like the dictionary, of being able to communicate effectively with other team members and stakeholders about what you mean by a certain application of BIM or a certain use of BIM.
Yeah, in some ways it's the outcome you're trying to achieve, and it's the method in there. But really, I always go back to, it's the why, what you're trying to do. Like, we have BIM uses like author design. Our goal is to create a design, to create that communication that we were talking about earlier. That's what we're fundamentally trying to do. We combine that with a method and an outcome. Then we have a BIM use case. So one thing interesting inside of the BIM uses is we separate them between BIM uses and BIM use cases. So BIM uses are the fundamental reason that you're trying to implement BIM. Like, what are you trying to achieve? And then when you pair them with a method and outcome, that becomes a BIM use case. So a method, specific technology. A lot of times you have things like, I'll just use laser scanning as an example, right? Laser scanning in itself, in my opinion, is not a BIM use. The objective you're trying to achieve through the technology of laser scanning is a BIM use. So if we're trying to capture an existing condition or capture condition, whether it be the condition of an existing facility, a facility in progress, or a record of a facility using laser scanning, to create a site model or to create a digital twin, that is a BIM use. And so and specifically what I called out there was a BIM use case, so that you can get, when you get to a BIM use case level, the detailed level of saying a methodology, saying an outcome, then you can actually get to the point where you are actually communicating what a requirement for a vendor to provide you.
Yeah.
And oftentimes in early BIM requirements, they're like coordination, do coordination. And you're like, okay, I don't know what you mean. Let's be a little bit more specific. We want to coordinate our design intent using what technology, and then what is our goal to come out of that. So so get more specific in your requirements, and then know why you're doing what you're doing with the BIM purposes, BIM uses.
That's an important distinction. I do recall that discussion. BIM use is the why, and then the using the technology, or the chosen technology or required technology is the how, and then the what you want to achieve, your goal, that's the outcome. So the why, the how, and the outcome, mix all those together, and you've got a BIM use case. But the BIM uses specifically address why doing each one of these things.
I actually had a diagram that we talked about during our sessions that was the Simon Sinek classic Start With Why, right? Because it wrote a whole book, right? So, and oftentimes we'll start with what, or we'll start with how, and when we're called that a BIM use. But if you don't start with that why, that purpose that you're trying to achieve, and those really tie back to kind of the BIM goals that you're trying to achieve, and the project goals that you're trying to achieve, and then you can go into how you're going to do it and what's the outcome that you're going to achieve. So kind of just start with why.
Yeah, and this I'd like for our audience to know that these are not just a one sentence, or one phrase BIM use. There was quite a bit of rigor that you and the group developed. I don't remember exactly how many attributes, but each of the BIM use, those initial BIM uses that became part of NBIMS version 4 had a long list of attributes, and I'm just kind of looking down some of them now, and it was, obviously the name and the definition, but the group also developed things like related terms. What are some example use cases? What's some benefits, some commentary? So there was quite an extensive list of attributes that the group not only said, okay, capture conditions is a BIM use, but here's the definition of it, the standard recognized definition of it, what you can expect, if there's any predecessor BIM uses or successor BIM uses. Other things like competencies, excuse me. What would an individual or a group need to know and be able to do to execute a BIM use?
Yeah, our goal at the end of the day was to create I'll call it a one pager. Some of them might be a little bit longer than that, but really, what is that? Everything about that BIM use. Like you talked about successors and predecessors, not necessarily that those successors and predecessors are necessary, but they support each other. Just like a project lifecycle supports each other. It's a lot harder to do something without having that information from the start. So they can feed into each other, just like your construction schedule. And then with that, let's give some examples. So one thing, like with the example BIM use cases, there was a lot of discussion about leaving some practical applications of BIM out. And we actually started communicating those through example use cases so that the users of the guide, the users of the National BIM Standard can see, oh, I can do that in my organization, or I can start requiring that. That's the specific language that I can put in a set of requirements, or this is how I can actually start implementing. And we took not all of those, but we took a lot of those BIM use cases from the various resources and made them into BIM use cases as examples, so that we didn't think that we had to have a comprehensive list, because I don't think there's ever going to be a comprehensive list of BIM use cases. Technology's changing, your method's going to change, there's going to be an outcome that's slightly different. Those whys hopefully can be fairly consistent because we're still building buildings, we're still building large infrastructure projects, but the technology is always going to be changing. the method's always going to be changing. Potentially outcomes are always going to be changing. So let's give an example. Let's give you a formula for how to create and document that and communicate requirements, which I think we have in there. And then from there, you can develop your own BIM use cases. I know in the future we talked about, hey, is there a way to just ballot a single additional BIM use and a ballot additional use case that we could have in here and start adding to our list? If you guys have those, to the listeners that are out there, if you have those, send them. We'll start incorporating them down the road. I don't know that any timetables on any of that, but our goal, our vision for when we're drafting this is to give that framework for communicating additional BIM use cases.
And to that point, that was what was conceived for version 4. We call it version 4 to, give the linear progression of, 1, 2, 3, the previous versions. But the idea for the National BIM standard going forward is to be a very agile approach. And that's the reason we broke it into modules, that modules can be updated independently of each other. And there is a strategy for us to move more towards continual improvement.
So we're going to the subscription model, Johnny, of this, or the SaaS model for National BIM Standard, where it's like, hey, it's always updating. Hopefully we don't get any big like CrowdStrike failures here.
No. No, it wouldn't. It would not be that. Definitely would not be that frequent. It is. The National BIM Standard has always been free, and we're excited that version 4 is continuing to be free and available to anyone that wants to use it. We would like to hear from folks who are implementing it. Give us your feedback. We want to hear not only your success stories, but also the challenges you have. That feedback is always good, and it's always appreciated. And also would like to just mention for our audience, if you want to go check it out, we'll make sure that the link is in the description of the episode, as well as the notes across our various channels. But you can head over to NIBS.org, NIBS.org/NBIMS, NBIMS, and that'll get you to the landing page for the standard, and you can explore the standard, and you'll see in there the BIM use definition module, and then there's several tabs in there that you can explore. I encourage you to go check it out, read it. There's resources that you can download as well, and so you can begin to put those in use in your projects and organization. And again, we'd love to hear how you are doing it or any challenges that you may face.
Yeah, I mean, the standard's built by industry experts, probably just like the people listening here. So any feedback that you have is greatly appreciated. I mean, that the list of BIM uses that we talked about, all the requirements, everything, every module in there is built by people hopefully implementing these technologies and using these technologies in their day-to-day practice. So the more people we can get involved in that, the more communication, collaboration, comments, it makes it a better standard for everyone. I've always been ever since really the BIM project execution planning guide, give it away, let people provide feedback and iterate. And our goal is to make our industry better, not just an individual company. If I always measure myself on level of impact, and these are the type of efforts that have high level of impact if we can get the eyes on it and get people thinking around a similar mindset.
Very good. Well, Ralph, let me ask you just a couple other questions here.
Sure.
One, I just wanted to get your take while we have you here, and I know you're very involved in the industry and have been for many years. But from your perspective, what do you think are some of the challenges or opportunities we as an industry are immediately facing here?
Some of the challenges we're immediately facing, I would say time. So this is an interesting thing. Like everyone's worried about AI replacing their job. I'm like, okay, good, let it, because we as a industry don't have enough of time to do our jobs. So everyone I talk to in the construction industry is spread thin. And that's a staffing problem, but that's also a way that projects are developed problem. That's also that we've made our processes way more complex than they need to be. So how do we as an industry simplify? I mean, that's not a great technology answer, but it is the reality of the world we live in, and we got to just stop throwing bodies at a problem, right? Stop
Yeah.
throwing people at a problem. Um, but it's one of the challenges I see. Like, your great people are just spread way too thin, and I don't like the term work life balance. I like the term work life harmony. But it is a real challenge for people. I think it's getting better as an industry. We're starting to see that, but we're also seeing that there's just things that need to get done that aren't getting done.
That's interesting. So, I mean, that challenge does lead into that opportunity of what we've been talking about is standardization, and obviously the National BIM standard and process re-engineering, eliminating waste. Yeah, I think all of those are really opportunities that have been available to us. But again, as you point out, the challenge of um, you know, leaders and workers in the industry being spread very thin, and then also the challenge of our anticipated, and we're starting to realize, this labor shortage that has been predicted. Yeah, we do have to find better, faster, more efficient ways to complete our work as an industry, and start to raise the productivity level.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at construction, we're the only industry where we're building a product where you just talk about the cost of the product getting more and more relative to inflation. This is several years ago, but I did a study that talked about that inflation is probably 25% faster in construction
Oh,
than
wow.
regular inflation, right? And that's not a made up statistic. That's reality of when I did the study. That was like 3 or 4 years ago now, which is probably worse now.
Yeah.
But I mean, I just don't know how that's sustainable to constantly have your building products, your products being more expensive, and not like, if you look at a car, maybe not true in the last couple of years, but if you look at a vehicle, it's actually less expensive relative to inflation to buy a car today, minus the last couple of years, than it was. Not true for a building industry.
Yeah.
The value of a dollar is less today in an industry in construction than it was 10, 15, 20, 30 years ago.
Yeah, that's one of the main components of the National BIM program, right? Is that we realize the need for standardization, but we also realize the need that owners need to be able to build more for less, and that's the opposite of what is being experienced, as you suggested, right? With construction cost, material cost, everything has risen and continues to rise, and to offset that, we have to have re-engineered processes and standards to
Mm-hmm.
help eliminate some waste. Well, man, it has been an absolute pleasure to talk with you today, Ralph. I want to throw out our bonus round of questions here. We always like for our guests to tell us a little bit about themselves that the audience would not otherwise know. Can be a funny story or fact, or just something important to you. But anything you feel like sharing today?
So don't know that I mean, I just I'd love to tell them some of the stories that we have in some of our evenings at Army Corps of Engineers National, or the BIM consortium there, but we'll maybe leave those off the record. But I mean, I don't know if I have funny stories. I'll just tell you some of the things that are interesting to me. Try to have a life outside of BIM. And what's funny is I'm not doing much BIM today, right? So a few years ago, like we talked about the challenges of adoption, right? Started really moving away from trying to strictly implement BIM and just try to help organizations get better. I just recently opened up my own practice called Building Better, and we're focused on technology adoption. BIM is an aspect of that. It can be an aspect of that, but it's even more fundamental. How do we take your organization from analog to digital? How do we give you the technology? We're using Procore as our primary means of that. I just had a conversation today about Bluebeam, and some conversation last week about just Office 360 or Microsoft 365, and how to use those fundamental technologies to make your industry better, to make your organization better. So BIM, for a lot of organizations, is still aspirational, and we will get there as an industry as a tool to make us more efficient and effective, but we still need a lot of the fundamental technologies to make ourselves better. That keeps me up at night. The other things that keep me up at night is I'm now a real estate investor. So we have a couple properties that we're taking a look, making sure that those are actually getting taken care of. So that's always a fun time. So you get to actually take the processes that you've learned and implement it at the larger commercial level and micro down them to what actually makes our properties manage effectively and what actually gets them built effectively. So a little blood, sweat, and tears in that one, but just trying to, hopefully not too much blood.
Well, that's very exciting about your business ventures. I'd encourage folks to go and check out Building Better. Reach out to Ralph for more information about his business and the work he does there if you're interested. And just as a recap of some of the things we talked about for our audience, it's been a great discussion, Ralph. I always enjoy connecting with you. And this one of the main points.
Always happy to chat, Tony.
Yeah. One of the main points that I think is really good for our audience to understand is, especially about NBIMS version 4 and the BIM use definitions, they were a lot of rigor. I think that's the main takeaway that I'm hearing. So much rigor in pulling years of experience and years of different BIM uses development, and then also BIM uses that from around the world being brought together, deeply analyzed by a group of industry experts, including those from infrastructure, horizontal construction, as well as vertical, and then producing this basic list of 16 BIM uses with attributes identified, and then also providing a framework for that list to build over time is a huge concept. And I think the second thing that really stands out to me with this whole story is that, the BIM uses they really define the why. You still need to add your own how to accomplish them to reach your goal or the outcome, and all those together create a BIM use case that can be documented and shared with others in the industry. So any additional comments, any last thoughts you want to share with our group today, Ralph?
No, just thank you for your leadership in all of this. Johnny works a lot behind the scenes to make all this possible. Kind of keeps pushing our industry forward. And especially when he was a straight up volunteer, he wasn't getting paid for this. None of us were getting paid for this. So it's just out of the goodness of his heart or his desire to make our industry better. So I just want to thank him for that and thank everyone really that's been involved in the National BIM Standard. I know I'll speak for myself here. There's a lot of times where people in your organization ask you what you're doing and why you're doing it. And if we can get some adoption, make our industry a little bit better, make ourselves 1% better. So I always say make ourselves, I can make the whole industry 1% better, that's way more important than making my industry or my organization 10% better or a specific company 50% better, right? So how can we get better overall? And Johnny and all the volunteers have really helped contribute to that and making our full industry as long as we can keep that going, keep the momentum going. I think we'll fix those problems in our industry. We're not broken beyond repair. We can get better. Absolutely.
Always enjoy continuous improvement. Ralph, man, thank you so much for the ever advancing, progressing. Thanks for the acknowledgement. Really appreciate it. And yeah, we really appreciate all your efforts over the years. Thank you again for joining us, Ralph, and sharing your expertise. So folks, if you want to learn and hear more content like this, then please subscribe to our Building Innovation podcast wherever you listen to podcasts. We're on all the major channels, and also be sure to head over to our YouTube channel to get more great content about NBIMS, including the video portion of this podcast. Please like and share the episode, share it with your networks, and we'll see you next time.
You've been listening to Building Innovation, the podcast, the official podcast of the National Institute of Building Sciences. For more information, visit our website at nibs.org.